I will show you how to install Node-it. Actually, it's very simple. It's going through the same process installation of any other add-on. So once you open up Blender and you downloaded your zip file on BlenderMask-it, Gumroad, or whatever platform, go to the preferences here and click on install and go to the root folder where you extracted your add-on. Once you've done that, you just have to activate it here and you have everything right here. If you need any information regarding any nodes, you can click on documentation. It will bring the documentation page. So you have a list of every node. Here in the node list, you'll see I've listed all the nodes here available. You can check from time to time. I will update maybe the icon and tease a little bit more about what's coming up next. But for now, we have everything here available. So if you click on any of these, you're gonna have the placement of the shader in the node group, where to plug it. Also, you're gonna have all the parameters and sliders described and some creative application on how to use it and where to use it. Once you install Node-it, the way to use it would be first to have an object with a material, because if you have nothing in the material applied, you won't have UI display. So you can create a new material, and once you have a material, you're gonna have the UI appearing with all the nodes here. So there's many ways of bringing the nodes. The first one would be to use that UI on the end panel on the right. So you have to click on the node you want to bring here and simply add the node. That's one way of doing it. You can press Shift+A to bring another window here, and you're gonna have Node-it on the bottom here. You're gonna have all the nodes listed here, and to me, it's much more convenient to work this way. It's much more fast, because here it's nice to have a thumbnail, but you have to go through 2 actions to bring a node. And here it's literally 1 click away. And the last one would be to go into the add menu here, and you have the exact same menu. It is going to be very useful if you want to add it to any object. Basically for engines and rockets, that's very useful. Firstly, you have to plug the color and the emission if you want to have that oddness appearing as an emission. Of course, it comes between your last node before the base color, so you have to plug that. The first slider is going to be how much odd is the metal actually. You can also play with the heat tint here, which is the first thing you see before it's getting odd. You can change the radius of it if you want it more thin or more wide. So you can make it bigger or smaller, it's really up to you. And also you can play with deformation. Basically it's going to bring a noise that will act as a mask. You can change its scale, make it bigger or smaller. It adds a little bit more variation, but let's get rid of that for the moment. You can activate the ambient occlusion. It's adding another level of detail. The ambient occlusion will take into account other object proximity, but also its own proximity. So as you can see, the result here is quite different. You can tweak it with the distance here if you want it less wide or a little bit more. You can play with the contrast or the offset of this contrast. And if you start adding objects that are close to this object, you're gonna see that the proximity of the object will make the metal react. What you can do also is start mixing other nodes, like the proximity node one. If you want to play with that, you have this slider, and I've already set up here an empty that is acting like a control mask. You simply have to plug the mask proximity here into the max proximity input and activate it with this slider. If you still want to have a little bit of those edges affecting the node, you can. The ColorReplace-it acts as a color picker, and you can select any color basically and replace it with another one. You don't have to replace the color outside of Blender, you can do it directly in Blender. If you want to be able to select the right color, mute the node with the M shortcut. Otherwise, if you activate the node, it will directly replace the color with the impossibility to select the previous color. So better to stay muted, select color, and that's gonna be it. Sometimes it's not enough. If you start playing with the cursor here, you'll see that some other color that you don't want to be affected, at the end they are. So I've added this function where you can stack different color selections. So here we can start playing with the other one. Here, as you can see, we're kind of selecting other values, and here even more. Now you can either choose the mix or the color. The color is going to be a one-on-one flat replacement. As you can see, it's very matte. If you choose the color, it's going to take into account a little bit more the dark and the white values. ColorReplace-it can be very useful also to remove shadows that are baked into the model. Here, as you can see, you have two different lights. You have the HDRI I've just set up for the scene, and the one that is baked into the texture. If I start moving my HDRI, you will see the shadow moving. But if you color replace the right value, you can get rid of that and have a clean model. ColorShift is a very powerful tool to give a little bit more randomness to your instances. You can choose either to shift the hues or saturation or the values. So that can be very handy to add a little bit more variation to duplicated objects, especially for forest or any other objects. If we push all the cursor to 1, it will randomly shift the value, the saturation and the range of the hue randomly. So every time you will duplicate this object, a change will occur. You can change the random seed. Proximity mask acts as a mask. It's driven by the proximity of an empty or any other object. I have my empty here that is linked to the mask. To achieve such a thing, you have to enter in the node group proximity mask, and you have to select here in the node group. In the texture coordinate, you need to select the empty. Once you've done that, the mask will be linked to the empty. Then you have different control over the mask. So you can either choose to not having any noise breaking the gradient here, which you can, by the way, control the expansion of it or the contrast of it. When you activate the noise, like so, you're gonna have that thing happening where you have a noise on the edge. You can control the size of the noise as well as the seed, and you can have other type of noise too. You can use any other images or procedural noise of your choice by plugging it here in the image input, and to activate, you need to slide this to the right. Okay, that fingerprint, you need to activate that first to have a noise. And once you have that activated, you can activate the image input here, where you can basically play with the texture of your choice here. So it's adding great breakup here in the texture, and as always, you can control the size of your empty. I compressed it on the Z-axis, and it gives you those nice pattern appearing here. Let's go back to 1. Expand this. If you want more contrast, of course, you can bring in a color ramp here or a contrast node. So here, let's say we want more contrast, like so, and here. And now we have a very contrasty mask. Add a little bit more detail to your noise masks, especially on the edge between the white and the dark values. So if you plug that right before the principal BSDF, basically right after your noise, you're gonna start having details appearing here, as you can see. The first function is the warp. You're gonna be able to warp your noise around the shape of your noise. This is very useful to make like planetary clouds or a cyclone. You can also control the scale of your noise as well as the roughness. And by the way, this is the basic noise that comes by default, but you can also after plug any texture of your choice here. Then you can control the contrast of your noise and also the shift of that contrast here. You have the ability to import any texture in your, I'm gonna bring a pattern here and here. So it won't appear. You have to slide this slider here to make it available right here. And then here you have the control over the transition thickness, basically the range where the noise is appearing. So you can increase that or shift the values here. As you can see, the white area is the base of your noise, and the texture is appearing here. So if you want to shift that space, it's gonna be here, as you can see. So reason why I called it transition thickness. Anyway, we can get rid of that, and as you can see, we have barely some noise happening here, but it's a great detail here we can add. So let's decrease the contrast, and we're gonna bring a little bit more of that noise. Control the contrast here. Our noise maybe is too contrasty, maybe not. Really depend on what you want. Let's bring more distortion, a little bit less, a bit more. Or do we warp that noise around our shapes. Up to you. I've mixed my rust shader with a transparent node, and the Destruct-it node is driving the factor. So the white values will make the rust appears, while the darker one will make the shader disappear. It's acting like an alpha, basically. This one is acting like mask proximity-it. You have to press tab to enter in the node, and you have to select the empty or the object you want to use as a proximity. Once you're done, you've just mapped the empty or whatever object to your mask. So the mask will be driven by this object proximity. On all the noise, you can control the scale, the seed, and the expansion of the mask. So let's start with this one. We can change the seed, and we can also expand the limits of the mask. So you can achieve such a thing also by increasing the size of your empty. We can choose another type of noise here, empty here, and we can make it bigger. The other function that is quite nice is to use your own noise. Here you can use another procedural one or image texture. And here you can spread the contrast. As you can see, you end up with a circle. If you want to add a little bit more noise to the edge of this circle, you can, which is nice if you want gradual destruction happening. Here we have a basic cube with a concrete material applied on, and I want to add leaks on it. So what I can do is I want to keep the same material to make leaks. So basically I want more specular and more darker values where the leak appears. So what we can do first is duplicate this material with my material setup on it. We can press Ctrl-Shift-D to keep the link, all right? And if you press Ctrl-Shift and you click on the right button of the mouse and drag, it's gonna bring a mix shader. So that's a very efficient and quick way to mix two materials. We're gonna have the base concrete, and the other one is the one that's gonna be wet. We can bring our node here, node it, and we can bring the lick one here, and we're gonna plug that in the factor of the mix shader. So when it's dark, it's displaying one material, and the white's gonna display the other one. The mask itself looks like this. All right, we have the white and the dark, and if we plug that here, we're gonna have the two materials. But since we didn't modify anything in the second one, nothing will change here. So we can start playing with the gamma of the albedo. We're gonna make the texture look more dark. Here, maybe we can increase a little bit more the contrast to have one texture appearing a little bit more. And we want a little bit more specular on it. It's gonna be wet. So I'm gonna increase the dark value to make it a little bit more wet here. Maybe the dark are too dark. Looks more natural. We got a scale. The scale is gonna bring more leaks, or it's gonna be more simple like that. So those values are to be adjusted according to the side of your mesh you're working on and the look you want to achieve at the end. So it really depends on your artistic ability and judgment here. We have the lick length, so it's pretty straightforward. You're gonna have more long licks or shorter ones. The contrast max, it's gonna increase the contrast and it's gonna play also with the length. Noise break. So the noise break gonna add a little bit more variation to the lick. Maybe some parts are drying and other are still wet, so that can be interesting at some point. And the noise detail is gonna bring more noise on the edge of the lick, which is nice sometimes to add a little bit more gritty texture. And the different look output here, it's just gonna give you a more rough, let's say, it gives you another option artistically wise if you want to change and shift a little bit the shape of your licks. The last option here are the output outlook. You're gonna see that a lot in my notes, and you can refer to the documentation for further application and information on how to use it. So basically the contrast will make the white and dark value more closer, and the contrast offset gonna shift that contrast the values toward the dark or the white values. ZMask-it. So this node is here to help you add anything on any axis you want. And when I'm saying anything, as this example shows, you can have a rock texture, but maybe you want to add on a certain axis grass or snow, for example. So this node is here for that. So here we have grass. We can increase a little bit more the contrast to make it more clear where it's appearing. If you want to add snow, it's working too. So here I just put a color, but it's just for the purpose of the example. So the controls are pretty straightforward. You have a control over the contrast. See, if you want a smoother transition between the snow and the rock, you can decrease the contrast. If you want more snow than the rock, you can shift toward one values or the other one if you want less snow. I'm talking about the snow, but it can be anything else, of course. And you can also control the orientation of the normal. By default, the mask is pointing toward the Z-axis on top, but you can move the axis around and start playing with the orientation. So maybe there is wind and it's not completely, on one axis. It might be on some other, right? You can play with the x-axis too. It really depends on what you want to achieve here and what you want to have as a result. EdgeWear-it is going to do worn edges basically. You can control the scale by shifting the values to the right. But that function is to be more soft, almost sharper. You can also add edge distort. You're gonna have a mask appearing on the edge of your edgewear. That's cool for adding a little bit less clean edgewear. And you can of course change the scale of that. This noise break is here just to break the frequency of that edgewear. If you want to get rid of some part, like here, you can control the scale of it, the detail, the seed, or the contrast of the mask. You can increase the contrast to a very, very precise edgewears. You'll see that you will have some artifacts here on the low poly. You have that thing here called high to low poly, and that will help getting rid of those artifacts. And here, once you set up that, you can start using it on low poly model. Think about this when you're using EdgeWear-it. If you have low poly meshes, you can just slide this slider here and it's gonna solve the problem. We want to add moss a little bit on the base of this wall. So as you can see with the black and white masks, you can control different things here. The height of the mask, the break, the big scale break, let's say, and the tiny, which add a lot of detail. You can also increase the contrast, making the growth a little bit more obvious, and offset also the values. It will act a little bit like the growth 8, but if you start tweaking both of them, you will have great control. Now, if I plug that in the factor slider of the shader, then maybe you can play and plug some moss texture here. Just for the sake of the example, I'm going to plug some moss texture here. Now that we have our moss, we can play with the contrast, a little more sharp. The breaks, the detail, maybe we can offset the contrast. Scratch is going to be here if you want to add scratch to your design and you don't want to spend any more time finding the right texture. So it comes with different texture here. So depending on the one you really want, you can play with this. You can play with the scale, of course. The location, the rotation of these scratches, and you can play also with the contrast of it. You can add breaks with the noise break here. I've already bring an image texture here you can use if you want to paint very precisely where the scratches appears. You can select the node here, activate the paint mask and switch into the material preview. You can select texture paint, and from here, if you select the white color, you're gonna start painting the scratches. So very good to apply scratches where you really want. You can right click here to select the color, etc, etc. Don't forget to save this image here in the image editor if you want to keep it and not lose it when you close your Blender file. This node comes in between the texture coordinate and the mapping one. When you activate it, it's gonna influence a random rotation on the UV tiling. what we can start doing is increasing the size. So here you see the repetition, and sometimes you want it to be clamped at 90 degrees because you want to keep the hard surface vibe of it. So this node is doing that. So we can increase or decrease the size of the texture. And here with the influence, you can influence the random rotation. Here you have a random scale that you can apply, and you can also play with the seed if you want another look, basically. Might happen that sometimes your texture are too crisp and you want to blur them a little bit. So you can achieve such a thing with blur. You simply have to drag and drop the node here through the UI on the right here, or with the Shift-A button here. You place it between the texture coordinate and the mapping one, and you'll start having blur. If I mute the node here, you see it's crisp, and here I started blurring. So you can control the amount of blur you want, but also the quality. You can apply some blur breaks if you want to keep sharp areas and blur other one. It can be really nice to add this kind of heat effect on top of any texture. It's a basic stone pavement and I want to be creative with it. So I'll just bring in Warp-it. Warp-it will distort your UV coordinates and it will let you have a little bit more creative control over texture. So here you have a warp intensity slider, which will give you the ability to control how much warp you want to add to your existing material. So here we can push the slider to this stage, and you're gonna have a very logical warp thingy happening on the texture. So I've added a noise control input here, but here you can play with the scale. You can play with the detail of your noise. You can play with the roughness of it, the distortion, if you want more distortion, a little bit less. And of course the seed if the result doesn't suit your expectation. You can control the contrast, which is pretty nice. It controls the noise contrast here. You can also shift the contrast, so toward the white values or toward the dark values, which give you a better control over the results of the warp. And you have another ability is to bring another noise of your choice. So you can choose either procedural noise that are built in Blender, or you can bring in textures. Here I'm going to use another procedural noise if you want other looks. And yeah, it gives you other results that are pretty cool and creative, but you can also use basic texture too. The node Anim-it gonna animate any values automatically. You just have to plug the type of animation you want in the values you want to animate and simply slide the sliders. You're gonna have control over the speed, the range, or the shift of them. Here I just plugged into the X value of a mapping node the linear animation, so the value will constantly move from one value to infinite, let's say, and you're gonna have control over the speed. So I've clamped the values, but you can manually put any values here, like 250, and it's gonna be way more faster, maybe 500. Even faster. And now let's try the oscillation. The animation is going to run between two values and it will do some back and forth. You can change the speed or the range. Here it's set up at 350 as a value, but you can lower it. So it's going to shift between two values, but the range is going to be much more shorter. You can also increase it and move the speed too. Let's decrease the range to show you the shift. The shift's gonna just shift the entire value. So if you're not happy with the positioning of your animation, you can shift it this way. And the last one is the random. Random will just select random values between two values that are clamped. If I decrease the range, it will be less appearing. If I increase it, the glitch animation will be more obvious. And there's a function here that I call glitchy, where the glitchy slider will basically just remove frames and it's gonna jump from one value to another.